I knew it was over the moment Austin didn't look up from his laptop. That 31-year-old tech bro sat across from me like I was some outdated software that needed deleting. He smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement. The name's Nate Crawford, by the way, 52 years old, and I just spent the last 22 years at DefenseLink Systems building the cybersecurity backbone that made their $850 million in government contracts possible. Now, I was being right-sized right out the door. His first words weren't hello or thanks for your service. Just, let's talk about organizational efficiency. Efficiency. I'd spent 22 years building the encryption systems that kept our military communications secure from Chinese hackers and Russian state actors. And now this kid was optimizing me into unemployment. Austin Palmer flipped open my performance folder like it was a lunch menu. Look, Nate, you've done decent work, really. But you've been here forever. We need people who are agile, who understand synergistic solutions and AI-driven transformation. He smiled that shark smile that never reaches the eyes. If you're not comfortable with our new direction, well, there's the door. You know the type. Fresh Stanford MBA, never wrote a line of code in his life, thinks leadership means throwing around buzzwords like paradigm shifts and digital disruption. Austin was the nephew of our old CEO Palmer Sr., rode the family connection straight to the corner office when his uncle retired last year. Had about as much understanding of actual cybersecurity as my German Shepherd Ranger. I got real quiet inside. The same feeling I got back in the Navy when the sonar pinged something that shouldn't be there. I looked at the team photo on my desk, half those engineers I'd hired straight out of Texas A&M and UT. I remembered staying late with them through system crashes and failed penetration tests, running on gas station coffee and determination. I remembered missing my daughter's wedding because our Fort Hood server farm got hit by a sophisticated attack during a critical operation. I remembered fighting for their salaries when upper management wanted to cut costs. Now this kid was handing me a participation trophy and a termination folder. So I closed my laptop. No drama, no speeches. I stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked out. Past my team, past the glass conference room full of people pretending not to notice. Past the same HR lady who'd once asked me to mentor her son. Nobody said a word. That kind of silence weighs heavy. But here's what people don't understand about guys like me. Sometimes silence is strategy. I didn't go home right away. I went to Rosie's Diner down on South Lamar. Got myself black coffee and a moment to think. You know Rosie's, red vinyl booths, waitresses who've been there since Bush Sr., coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I sat there and just breathed. Not raging, not planning anything dramatic, just thinking. DefenseLink had been my whole adult life. I joined when we were still operating out of a converted warehouse in South Austin, back when defense contractors were scrappy operations run by ex-military guys who understood the mission. Palmer Sr. had founded it in 1995 with 3 other Navy veterans who'd worked naval cybersecurity during the Cold War. I'd watched us grow from a 20-person shop to an $850 million Pentagon favorite, and all of it, the infrastructure, the architecture, the core encryption protocols, had my fingerprints in the foundation. I didn't document everything the way some fresh college kid might. I lived that code. It wasn't in a manual somewhere, it was in my head, built over years of late nights and impossible deadlines. Back when I was Chief Petty Officer on the USS Houston, I'd handled classified communications systems for the 7th Fleet. That experience became the backbone of everything I built at DefenseLink. I paid Rosie in cash, walked 2 blocks in the wrong direction just to clear my head, then caught a ride home. My house in Cedar Park still smelled like old leather and Ranger's kibble. My dog looked up from his bed, tail wagging but cautious. Dogs know when something fundamental has shifted. I set the termination folder on my kitchen table, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff, not the daily drinker, and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Buried beneath tax returns and expired warranties was a slim manila envelope, no label, just the weight of foresight and old Navy habits. Inside was the original provisional patent application. My name at the top, not DefenseLink's. Mine. Filed in August 2008 during one of the company's many chaotic reorganizations when legal was more focused on staying solvent than minding the intellectual property register. I'd been advised by someone much smarter than me, Danny Torres, my old Navy JAG buddy turned IP attorney. Danny's family had been in Texas since before the Alamo, knew how to write contracts that stuck. Nate, he'd said over beers at a dive bar in South Austin, file it under your name. You can always assign it later once the company's stable and they remember to cut you in properly. They never got stable. They just got greedy. And they sure as hell never remembered. DefenseLink had been licensing my core encryption framework the entire time. Lawyers had drafted agreements, temporary ones with expiration clauses and one very specific condition buried in the legal text like a landmine with a 17-year fuse. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, reversion of rights shall trigger automatically within 24 hours of formal notice. Signed, stamped, filed with the U.S. Patent Office. And nobody at DefenseLink ever followed up because nobody thought I would ever leave. I was the foundation guy, the reliable old dog, the one who kept the lights on while executives played musical chairs. Guess what, Austin? You just pulled the pin. The funny thing about working in defense for 22 years is you learn to think strategically. You don't react emotionally. You assess the situation, identify your assets, and execute with precision. Right now, sitting in my kitchen with Ranger at my feet and bourbon warming my throat, I was doing exactly that. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Slack messages from coworkers trying to figure out what happened. Sorry to hear, Nate. Please stay in touch. The kind of messages people send when they're scared they might be next. HR had sent an exit survey link like I was going to rate my execution experience out of 5 stars. I didn't answer any of them. Let them wonder. They'd all stood there and watched it happen like a corporate funeral where nobody brings flowers. Not one person had spoken up when Austin handed me that folder. Paul Richardson, who I'd saved from getting fired 3 times when his code broke production systems. Sarah Kim, who I'd mentored through her first Pentagon security clearance. All of them just stood there. But here's what they didn't know. What Austin and his MBA brain trust couldn't possibly understand. I wasn't just another employee walking out the door. I was the architect walking away from a building he still owned the blueprints to. And those blueprints were about to become very expensive. I stood in my hallway for a good 10 minutes, staring at the closet I hadn't opened in over a decade. Top shelf. Old banker's box labeled Original IP Archive. Personal. The kind of thing you keep meaning to throw away but never do. I sat cross-legged on the floor like I was back on the USS Houston, going through classified documents. Brittle printouts and coffee-stained notebooks scattered around me. My handwriting from 2008 looked like it belonged to a different man, one who hadn't yet learned how little the corporate world valued quiet excellence. Then I found it. Manila envelope, thick paper, crisp edges, still sealed with the original notary stamp. The date made my chest tight. August 15th, 2008, filed under my name, not DefenseLink's, mine. Back then, I was just trying to protect my work. We were a small team and I didn't trust the startup chaos. Half the company was ex-military guys who understood operational security, but the other half were business school types who treated intellectual property like poker chips. Palmer Sr. was solid, but even he got caught up in the funding circus. Danny had pulled me aside after one of those company happy hours where everyone pretended the funding situation wasn't desperate. Nate, he'd said, I've seen this movie before. File it under your name. You can always sign it over later when things stabilize. My grandfather learned that lesson the hard way during the oil boom. They never stabilized. They just got profitable. The formal assignment of rights had always been in process. Legal kept saying they'd handle it after the next funding round, then after the Pentagon contract, then after the IPO talks that never materialized, but nobody followed up because nobody really thought it mattered. I was never going anywhere, right? I was the foundation, the reliable guy who kept the servers humming while executives collected bonuses. Until one of them, Austin, with his perfect Stanford credentials and zero understanding of what actually made the company valuable, decided to modernize. I walked to my desk like it was a command center, opened the safe I hadn't touched in years. Had to try 3 combinations before I remembered. My daughter's birthday, my enlistment date, the day I started at DefenseLink. Tucked the envelope inside. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was reconnaissance. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop for a while, then opened an encrypted email to Danny. Subject line, need you to verify a clause. I attached a scan of the provisional filing. The fine print was clean and simple, written in that careful legal language Danny's family had been perfecting for generations. I typed, still valid after 17 years, hit send. Then I sat there in the blue glow of my screen, bourbon warming in my hand, Ranger curled against my leg like a silent co-conspirator. The phone buzzed again. Voicemail from Austin. I didn't listen. Probably some corporate speak about knowledge transfer protocols or transition planning. Too late for that. Danny called me back before sunrise. I picked up on the first ring. Does the clause still stand? I asked. He didn't answer right away. I could hear papers rustling, the soft click of his reading glasses. Danny was the methodical type, the reason he'd made lieutenant commander in the Navy and partner at his firm. He didn't give legal opinions based on hope. Finally, he let out a long breath. Yeah, and if they terminated you Monday at 4:15, it triggered reversion the moment you walked out. Patent 9,847,291 is yours again. I didn't speak. He added, Nate, you kept that clause active for 17 years. The core encryption patent just reverted to you automatically. Every line of code they're using is now technically trespassing on your property. I hung up without a goodbye. Not rudeness, just efficiency. There was work to do, and every second counted. That 24-hour window wasn't theoretical. It was real. By the time my kitchen clock read 6:30 a.m., I was logged into the USPTO filing system. The reversion confirmation was a pre-written template, something Danny and I had drafted back in 2008 just in case. I remember him saying, "You probably won't ever need this, but I've seen too many good engineers get screwed by companies that forgot who built their success." My great-grandfather lost a fortune in oil patents because he trusted handshake deals. Smart bastard. I opened the encrypted folder, double-checked the signature fields, and filled out the formal reversion notification. It wasn't dramatic. No fancy letterhead or cease and desist fanfare, just a quiet checkbox next to involuntary termination without cause, followed by a digital timestamp and a few upload fields. Click, submit. That was it. With that single click, ownership of DefenseLink's crown jewel, the encryption algorithm that powered their Pentagon contracts, their licensing deals, their entire investor pitch deck, slid back into my hands like a weapon returning to its rightful owner. I didn't celebrate. Just leaned back in my chair, cradled my coffee, and let the silence settle. Ranger jumped onto the couch and sniffed at the laptop, unimpressed by my newly acquired multi-million-dollar intellectual property. Dogs have perspective. I checked the USPTO system. The update wouldn't be instant, usually took a few hours to propagate publicly. But once it did, anyone doing a patent lookup would see a different owner, not DefenseLink Systems LLC, Nathan J. Crawford. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after you arm a nuclear device and realize you're the only one who knows it's live. That was me standing in my kitchen barefoot, watching the sun rise over Cedar Park, holding a reversion clause like a loaded weapon nobody remembered I possessed. Across town, DefenseLink's leadership team was probably sipping espresso, prepping for their 10 a.m. strategy meeting where they'd throw around words like optimization and digital transformation. Meanwhile, the legal foundation holding up their empire had just vanished. I wasn't going to call them, wasn't going to warn them. That was the old me, loyal, predictable, forgiving. The Nate who gave them 22 years and assumed they'd do right by him in return. That version was done. By 7:45 a.m., my inbox pinged, confirmation receipt from the USPTO. It was official. Patent number 9,847,291 was back where it belonged. I started drafting something far more interesting than a resume. Licensing terms. Here's the math that was about to ruin Austin's day. DefenseLink's current contracts were worth $850 million annually. My encryption system was the core of every single one. Industry standard for licensing critical IP, 12 to 15% of revenue. Let's call it 15% to keep things simple. That's $127 million per year in potential royalties. But I wasn't greedy. I'd ask for $18 million up front, basically 18 months of conservative royalties paid in advance, plus ongoing payments at 12% annually, plus a board seat with voting rights, plus public acknowledgement that I'd built the foundation they all stood on, and Austin Palmer's immediate resignation, because revenge in the digital age doesn't wear war paint, it wears a watermark. Austin was in rare form that morning. At least that's what I heard. Word travels fast when you've spent 22 years embedded in a place, especially when half the staff still thinks of you as the guy who kept their systems running while executives collected bonuses. Apparently, he kicked off the product strategy meeting like he was hosting a game show. Arms wide, teeth gleaming, dripping confidence like a used car salesman with a quota to hit. He was talking agile pivots and Q4 dominance, said the next gen update would revolutionize secure communications. Every feature, every enhancement ran off the same encryption core I'd written during the Obama administration, before DefenseLink even had proper server farms. And not one person in that room had thought to check the USPTO filings that morning. I could picture them clustered around the digital whiteboard, dragging blocks labeled core engine and security module like kids playing with dynamite. Austin probably mentioned me once, if at all, maybe as legacy architecture, or worse, the old system. By 11:30 my phone buzzed. Caller ID, Paul Richardson. Paul from development, who used to bring me breakfast tacos during late-night debugging sessions and once called me at 3 a.m. because his encryption implementation broke the test environment 2 hours before a Pentagon demo. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hey, Nate. His voice was careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. Quick heads up. We're moving your old code into the new build this week. Pentagon demo got moved up to Wednesday, 3 days after they fired you. Kinda weird without you here, to be honest. I let that sit in the air like a bad smell. Then I said, "Good luck with that, Paul." He paused. "Wait, what do you mean?" Click. Let them figure it out. This was the part people never understood about guys like me. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten lawsuits. I didn't write angry reviews or call their investors. I let the rope tighten on its own, and it was tightening fast. By noon, DefenseLink's legal inbox had received the USPTO reversion notification. But here's the kicker. Nobody read it, because in companies like DefenseLink, the legal team only checks what the executives tell them to check, and the executives were too busy high-fiving each other to realize the floor was about to drop out. Austin strutted through the halls like he'd conquered Rome, not realizing Rome had already filed a 30-page IP enforcement memo and was sipping bourbon by the fireplace. From what I heard later, he even made some crack in the break room about how clean the transition was. Something like, "He didn't even fight it. Guess he knew it was time." Yeah, Austin. I knew exactly what time it was. They were hours away from pushing a live demo that was 100% dependent on code they no longer legally owned. Every commit, every push, every scheduled integration test was now a line item on my licensing ledger. And I wasn't charging friendship rates. It started with a kid, one of those overambitious summer interns DefenseLink scoops up from expensive universities and feeds into the legal department like fish food. His name was probably Brandon or Hunter, doesn't matter. He was tasked with monitoring USPTO activity for competitor filings. Standard procedure, just click around, look for anything suspicious, flag if necessary. A box to check until he typed in DefenseLink's own patent numbers and saw my name staring back at him. I can only imagine the moment. Mouth probably went dry. Highlighter froze mid-stroke. Maybe he thought he'd clicked the wrong link. Maybe he refreshed the page 5 times, hoping a browser glitch would magically undo a corporate aneurysm. But the truth just sat there blinking on his screen. Inventor and owner, Nathan J. Crawford. Effective date, 24 hours post-involuntary termination. He flagged it, emailed it to his supervisor with a subject line like possible issue. Corporate speak for "I don't want to die for this." Legal read it, paused, probably reread it 10 times, then dug through their dusty agreement folder and found the clause. The one they'd filed and promptly forgotten. The one I'd slipped in like a silent tripwire 17 years ago. It was airtight. DefenseLink's $850 million defense contracts were now legally squatting on property they didn't own, and they'd already sent invitations for the Pentagon demo. Austin, of course, handled it with all the finesse of a reality TV star caught in a scandal. I'm told he laughed when legal brought it to him. "It's probably a clerical error," he said. Clerical error? Like the USPTO just accidentally handed over the company's most valuable IP to the guy he fired 48 hours ago. Then he doubled down, told legal to keep it quiet until after the demo, said they'd iron it out post-launch, and accused the legal team of chasing phantom problems. Phantoms. I'll be sure to carve that on his career's tombstone. Meanwhile, the development team kept working like everything was fine. They had no idea they were running daily builds, scheduling final QA, printing glossy materials with buzzwords like proprietary technology and patent-protected architecture, all of which now technically belonged to me. They were building a house on land they didn't own. Every hour that passed tightened the noose because once you demo something publicly, Once you claim it as your own, under IP law, that's infringement. And infringement with knowledge, that's willful, which means triple damages. Legal quietly began drafting a worst-case risk memo. I know this because one of the junior attorneys, a kid who'd been interning when I trained half the development team, accidentally forwarded it to Paul Richardson, who forwarded it to me. The subject line, patent reversion, urgent. The memo was 4 pages long, but the last line said everything. Recommendation, postpone demo until IP ownership clarified. It was marked confidential, senior management only. Translation, don't let the board see this yet. Because that's what Austin feared most. Not the law, not the consequences, the board. He hadn't told them I was gone, not officially. He'd buried my departure under a line item in the org chart update and phrased it like workforce optimization. He told them the next-gen system was ready, that everything was on schedule, that DefenseLink was cruising toward a major Pentagon contract renewal, so the board still didn't know. And the demo was tomorrow. The call came at 6:35 a.m. the next day, just as I was letting Ranger out for his morning routine. I knew that number by heart, though I hadn't seen it flash on my screen in nearly 5 years. Colonel James Hartwell, retired, the founder's old partner. Palmer Sr.'s right-hand man who'd stepped back when the VCs took over. Nate. His voice was tired and pissed off. Jim, I said, pouring coffee. Long time. I just got an alert from USPTO. Patent 9,847,291. It lists you as the owner. I said nothing. Just waited. Is this some mistake? No. Another beat. That can't be. You assigned that to DefenseLink. No, Jim, I said calmly. We never filed the final transfer, remember? I was told it would be formalized after the Series B funding. Legal got reshuffled, then reshuffled again. It never got done. He went quiet. I could hear him breathing slower now. Processing. Nate, this is our core encryption system. I know. Finally, he asked it. Why now? I let the question settle between us like dust in a server room. Then I said, because your people terminated me without cause. Because the clause we wrote 17 years ago just kicked in. He groaned like he'd been gut-punched. That was never supposed to be permanent. I trusted people would honor the deal. Silence. They didn't, I said. Click. Demo day landed like a meteor. DefenseLink's downtown conference center had been polished to perfection. Brushed steel, sterile spotlights. A 40-foot LED wall flashing next-gen is now. Rows of leather seats filled with Pentagon liaisons, existing contractors, Defense Department officials, every person whose signature or budget approval mattered. Austin stood backstage in a navy blazer 2 sizes too confident. He was smiling, joking with the CTO, doing that thing executives do where they believe charisma can outpace competence. The intro video played. Glossy stock footage of satellites, server farms, diverse engineers smiling at monitors. The audience applauded politely. Austin adjusted his mic, walked to center stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice smooth with self-satisfaction. What you're about to see is the future of secure communications, a platform that will revolutionize how our military approaches encrypted data transmission. He gestured to the screen behind him where the system UI loaded up. Sleek, familiar. Mine. In the next 15 minutes, he said, we'll walk you through our most advanced iteration yet, powered by our proprietary encryption engine developed right here at DefenseLink. That's when legal moved. A tall woman in a dark blazer stepped onto the stage and leaned close to Austin's ear. We can't demo that system. We don't own the patent anymore. Austin blinked, laughed too loud. Excuse me. Small technical hiccup, he told the crowd. Give us just a moment. The mic was still on. The whole front row heard him whisper, What are you talking about? We've always owned that code. No, Austin, legal replied. You never did. Nathan Crawford owns the IP. The reversion is final. If we demo this, we're in willful infringement territory. The blood left Austin's face. Whispers started in the back. Phones lit up. Then it happened. Someone, that junior attorney probably, had already leaked the USPTO documents to the Pentagon officials. Full printouts of patent 9,847,191, along with the reversion clause in plain language, were being passed around the room. A Pentagon official stood up holding the papers. "Nathan J. Crawford," she said, "I believe this is the patent registration referenced in your marketing materials." Austin squinted. "I'm not sure where that came from." "Public record," the official said. "We all have it now." Nobody looked at the stage anymore. They were reading, sharing, connecting dots. That code, that system, it wasn't Defense Link's, it was mine. By the time Austin tried to salvage it, rambling about roadmaps and partnership opportunities, half the audience had already left. The demo was dead. I woke up the next morning to 203 missed calls. 30 minutes later, I sent my terms. Jim called back within the hour. "What do you want, Nate?" $18 million up front. 12% ongoing royalties. Board seat with voting privileges. Public acknowledgement of original authorship. And Austin Palmer's immediate resignation. 4 hours later, my terms were accepted. All of them. Some people call it revenge. I call it market correction. Because when you've spent 22 years building something, you make sure everyone remembers who really built it.